Hello, I'm Earl Taylor, Chief Marketing Officer at the Marketing Science Institute. As many of you know, nonprofit MSI serves as the bridge between marketing theory and business practice, and our goal is to move the needle on significant marketing problems. We do this by funding research by leading academics worldwide on topics voted by our corporate sponsors and disseminating that research through members-only events and a variety of publications. I'm very pleased to welcome you to another MSI For Members by Members webinar. This is a series of webinars on subjects related to MSI's current research priority topics. Now first, I'd like to point out the chat with presenter function on the left-hand corner of your screen. Please use this feature to send through any questions you have for Deepak during the presentation. We will get to the questions and have a brief Q&A session following the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's featured speaker. Deepak Varma is Global Head of Neuroscience Insights at Millward Brown. He's been working for over a year to improve insight delivery from neuroscience tools, including client-specific training programs, and especially focusing on facial coding. Deepak has over 7 years of experience in neuroscience using EEG, facial coding, and eye tracking applied to areas such as advertising, packaging, brand equity, product development, and shopper solutions. He's one of the few people in the industry who has actually educated clients worldwide on the application of neuroscience in market research and how to integrate that with traditional survey methods. He has over 20 years experience in traditional qualitative and quantitative marketing research techniques, and prior to joining Millward Brown, he was Executive Vice President Client Services at Nielsen NeuroFocus, where he managed international business and managed relationships with several global clients. Prior to that, he was also head of Nielsen Custom Research in the U.S. for 8 years. They had a variety of other leadership roles in the marketing research industry. So we're very pleased today to have Deepak Varma to talk to us about neuroscience and where we're going for that. So, Deepak, take it away.
Thank you, Earl. Thank you for the introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, in different parts of the U.S. and different parts of the world. You know, I actually been spending such a long time with dabbling in neuroscience, and I like to begin with the story and what happened to me personally. And I was so inspired when I kind of bumped into neuroscience, partly by accident, and I was so inspired by it that one day I took my daughter, who was in the 10th grade, to listen to a lecture with a professor in neuroscience at Berkeley, and she sat there, and my typical reaction would be, in about an hour, I would ask her, and I said, if you don't want to sit longer, I'll take you home. And she sat for all the 3 hours, and she got inspired by it that she started to even do her summer projects in Cal in the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, ended up joining Cal in electrical engineering, but yet continued her neuroscience projects all through. And today, she is actually doing her PhD in Stanford in electrical engineering and continuing her part of her projects in neuroscience. Some of them were in the brain-machine interface. So it didn't affect me professionally. It actually affected me personally. Completely sort of transformed me, and I am very passionate about the subject matter. I've learned a lot, and what I typically like to tell people, yes, I'll tell you how you can apply neuroscience in branding and in advertising, but what good is neuroscience if I can't tell you how it can actually affect your own life? And that's something which I really like to begin with. And actually, one of the ways which actually neuroscience, and this is a very small tip, which all of you you may be kind of sitting and trying to wonder what I'm going to tell you about the brand, but I'm going to actually tell you how neuroscience actually can help you make you happy. So when you are happy, you smile, but it actually works the other way around as well. And if you smile, it actually triggers the part of your brain which actually makes you think that you are happy. So the next time you're feeling low, just smile, and you'll start to feel happy. And the second tip is when you're out, going out there in the sun, wear dark glasses. Because what happens is when you're out there in the sun, you're frowning, when you kind of look at the sun. When you frown, your brain starts to think you're a bit stressed. So if you wear dark glasses and you smile, yep, it's going to make you happy and a little bit less stressed as well. The second tip, which I typically like to give people, because as you're listening to me, you may be doing several things, thinking that I can multitask. And here's the thing which I keep, if you were following some of the neuroscience literature, here's the thing which I read, that the brain typically, yes, it can multitask a little bit, but it's not really programmed to multitask. Yes, when you're driving, you're multitasking. But the more you multitask, it actually diminishes your ability to pay attention and focus for a long period of time. So if you're doing multiple things, just stop doing them right now and just listen to what I have to tell you. All right. So what are we here to talk about? And, the part of the neuroscience, one of the things to understand is how the brain's sort of structured. And typically, biologically, 90% of your brain, is performing homeostasis. It runs your basic body functions. 2 to 3% of the brain is responsible for implicit processing, what we call a system 1. And there is an equal 2 to 3% of the brain which is responsible for system 2, or what we call is the rational part of the brain. Now, they're both equal parts of the brain. They're independent of each other. Yes, one influences the other. System 1 is on all the time. It is what your intuitive judgment and automatic judgment are. It's easy, it's automatic, it's fast, and it's off recently over the last 7 to 8 years. There are methods now to capture system 1 directly using various techniques and methods. I'll briefly talk about that. And system 2, is the reflective process. It's the most effortful, logic, slow process. It's been captured through traditional research. And to sort of give you an example of, system 1, system 2, if you look at this face right now, in an instant you've pretty much processed that, this is an angry face. And it doesn't take you too long to process it. That's your system 1 actually processing it. If I actually ask you to multiply 15 into 19, yeah, you're going to take a couple of seconds, and then you might be able to come up with an answer. And that's literally what your system 2 is. And, can you imagine if your system 2 is on all the time, after a while you start to get tired? So you don't actually end up using system 2 as much as you think you do. A lot of people think they do, but not as much. But yes, you do. Lots of times you do. But system 1 actually literally helps you kind of do your daily chores. Have you ever wondered when you start in the morning to office and you're driving and you reach and you don't even realize how you actually reached office? You don't even remember the journey in between. And that's pretty much your system 1 sort of guiding you to take you there. So, now having established the differences between system 1 and system 2, I'll tell you a bit about another example of system 1. And, there's a phenomenon called mirror neurons. And you can, in very simple words, all it is monkey see, monkey do. You see this guy sticking his tongue out, and the monkey sticks his tongue out. Mirror neurons actually is a class of neurons which get fired when there is a motor action. So typically in the experiments which I've done is, when you move your hand, whether it's to grasp something or to pick up something, your mirror neurons start to fire. So moving your hand. So if you ever wonder, when you ever seen people, if I wave my hands right now, and if you were all sitting in front of me, your mirror neurons would have already started to fire. So if you were ever see kids kind of going in a bus and waving at you, and you start to wave back at them, you are thinking you're being friendly? No, it's your mirror neurons being fired. So what happens is mirror neurons fire when you even see an act of consumption, when you see somebody actually drinking a bottle of water in a conference room. you watch in literally a couple of seconds, there will be several other people who will be reaching out to their bottle of water and drinking even though they don't feel thirsty. And the relevance of mirror neurons would starts to happen in research, and especially in advertising. When you're actually promoting when you're promoting advertising where you're actually asking somebody to eat or drink, if you show someone actually picking up a bottle and drinking, or scooping a dollop of ice cream and bringing into their mouth and eating it, you're actually getting the subconsciously mirror neurons to fire. So the relevance of mirror neurons actually is very interesting. We start to see spikes in signals, whether it's in EEG or in facial coding, when we actually start to see this whole consumption process happening. So anytime, and it's a system one reaction. It cannot be controlled, and it's a classic example. Yawning is another example of system one. When we say yawning is infectious, that's another very interesting example of system one. Now, a little bit about the brains, and why does all these things also happen? Our brains are actually very greedy. It accounts for about 2% of the body weight and consumes 20% of oxygen, and the bulk of what the brain actually feeds on is glucose, 25% of glucose. And I think that makes something very interesting. I was actually reading this book by Daniel Kahneman, and it actually had a very interesting study among judges, judges who would be in Israel, who actually their job was to sort of accept or reject parole, and they actually monitored them across the entire part of the day. What they found was something very, very interesting, that as the judges were well fed, the typical approval rate for parole was 35%. The more well fed they were, the approval rate increased. The closer they were to mealtime, the approval rate decreased, and it actually went down to zero in cases when judges were even very hungry. So Daniel Kahneman's book basically talks about saying what was the overall learning, that hungry judges don't make very happy judges. So the learning exactly for you is, I would say, personally, when you're ever getting a review done for yourself, just make sure your boss is well fed. But anyway, the marketing implications of all this is that given the fact that your brain is consuming so much of energy, it really doesn't have time to think. And, if you ever enter into a room and you find there are, more than 10 people sitting, you'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and your brain kind of just shuts up and says, I'm not going to count anymore. I've had enough. And the implication of this, in whether it's in print advertising or your advertising in general, the brain has the ability to process about 3 to 4 image forms, or you don't increase the number of messages. I've seen both print as well as general advertising, where in the end you're throwing so many things at the consumer, and the brain does not have the ability to process so many things. Keep it simple. Have the lesser messages you have, the higher the ability for the brain to actually record and remember some of those messages. And given the fact that your brain kind of gets into that specific mode where it's always conserving energy, another interesting phenomena which you may have heard about is called associative activation. If I mention the word ice cream sundae, in a moment what you will start to think is, you'll start to think yummy, indulgent, creamy, vanilla, chocolate, cherry. And all this happened without you even thinking about it. It happened quickly, automatically, effortlessly, and you didn't even know about it. And when you think of cherry, other things started to fire. It's fruit, red, toppings. So what happens is it becomes very important to understand spontaneous associations, whether it's with your brands, whether it's with your ads, celebrities, candidates, it's very important to understand because that is literally how you end up taking decisions. So I have actually a very interesting case study to actually show you how we measured associative activations. And the often very talked about election between Clinton and Trump, we actually ran this implicit association, or I would say intuitive association test in October 24th, about I think 5 or 6 weeks before the election. And it was in terms of looking at the sample size, it was a, nationally representative sample, 50-50 men and women, broad age quotas. This was right in the timeline of events which had happened during our field dates was the first debates, the revelation of Trump's claimed loss and the leaked Hollywood tape, and the second debate on October 9th. So what did we do? And we actually measured their implicit responses. We picked up a set of positive and negative associations. So you can see the positive associations: confident, intelligent, trustworthy, truthful, passionate, prepared, caring, devoted, visionary. And the negative associations are secretive, arrogant, deceptive, selfish, corrupt, superficial, foolish, scary, reckless. So what do we do in the association test? It's actually very simple. It's a timed response test, and all you check is you check, is this an idea which you associate with your brand? And in this case, is this an idea which you would associate with the candidate? So typically the responses which happen very quickly within I would say sometimes 300 milliseconds to 500 milliseconds are what we call as the intuitive spontaneous responses. They are the quick decisions guided by system 1. The slower responses, which will take maybe 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds, they are a bit more reflective. You've had some time to think, and they are your reflected responses. So what we do is we plot them on an XY axis, and this is what we saw in case of positive associations. So what you see is on the left axis is the percentage total of yes and the percentage total of fast yes. So all you have to look at is the top rightmost quadrant, and that's where we need to focus on the most. That is basically saying that maximum number of people said yes and also said a very fast yes. So that is literally what some of the key drivers of the candidate, what they were looking for, and intuitively what we see over here is, despite everything, despite all the media which they had released at that time, Trump was considered confident and intelligent, and you had just Clinton being considered passionate over there. So despite all the misgivings which the media came up with, this was the intuitive association test. Now, when we looked at the negative associations, we actually unfortunately found that Clinton had so many more negative associations, from secretive, selfish, deceptive, corrupt, arrogant. Personally, when I saw this, I was like, oops, I don't know what's going to be the net result of this, because we all know how it ended out. But this is something which was a very, very interesting sort of lens, a very early lens into what was happening, and this was all based on your intuitive associations and what your system 1 responses were. So what is the implication of this? What is the implication of this when you're measuring your brands, when you're measuring celebrities? And all the work which I've done, I've seen very recently some clients actually partnered with another client, another of their vendor. They came out with the ad, and the ad pretty much bombed because one of the vendors was not really liked by consumers. And my advice to them is typically saying, when you are even partnering with a celebrity or with a vendor, try and understand what is the brand standing for at an intuitive level, and is and what does the celebrity or the other vendor stands at an intuitive level, and are they reinforcing your brand, or are they complementing it in a particular way, or are they completely, taking it far away from where you want your overall brand to be there? So essentially, your intuitive associations are a very good guide for you to get to understand what the instant meaning of the brand is. The second part which I'd like to actually cover is about the use of facial expressions and how we are using facial expressions and facial coding in combining it with other survey measures. So one of the important part is that given the fact that you have both System 1 and System 2, you have to figure out a way to measure both the systems. And the example which I'm actually going to be showing you is another example where we will actually show you how you will be using facial coding as well as survey measures to measure both the systems. And one of the things which has happened, there are two very important scientific discoveries which happened in facial coding. And one of the things which we found out was the history dates back to Darwin is facial expressions of emotions are universal. There's been a lot of research which has been done on this, and they've actually found that there are 6 basic discrete emotions of happiness, sadness, anger, fear, surprise, and disgust. And they're broadly, there's no difference. These expressions are not culturally determined, but they are recognized universally. Yes, what does happen is that there are differences in the extent to which somebody is going to smile in Latin America versus in Asia. And therefore, while the smile means the same thing in both the cultures, the extent to which one may smile in Latin America for a particular stimulus may be a lot more as compared to somebody who may be smiling in Asia. Therefore, you need to have normative data to be able to understand is the smile in Latin America comparable to the smile in Asia? You should be having the norms to be able to establish that, and there are norms available with all the partners who are in the industry who are doing this. There are norms available by region globally. So, but I think that was a very, very important part which actually helps to establish and use facial expressions. The second part, which was very interesting, is that there are micro-expressions, and micro-expressions are actually expressions that go on in the face in a fraction of a second. It's like literally 1/30th of a second, and they are so fast that you don't even realize it. It's a sign of concealed emotions. And because of that, because facial expressions happen literally from the onset in about 100 milliseconds to 250 to 300 milliseconds after you looked at the stimulus, they are completely non-conscious. They are pretty much automatic, and you can actually capture them. And because of that, it actually gives you a moment-by-moment reaction of anything which you're watching. So if you're watching an ad, it gives you a moment-by-moment reaction of how you're reacting to an ad. And one of the reasons why, this becomes very, very important is that, especially when you're watching advertising, if somebody asks you a question after you've watched advertising, your ability to recall the ad is driven primarily by primacy and recency, a little bit by peaks or troughs. But there are a lot of things in between you may not be able to recall, and that's a function of your explicit versus implicit memory. What you can reproduce very easily is your explicit memory, and typically explicit memory starts to diminish literally about maybe about a minute or two after you watch any stimulus. So if you watch an event and I ask you to reproduce what you watched, you may be able to reproduce something in the range of 50% or 60% of what you have watched. If I wait a little bit longer, your memory starts to diminish even more, and therefore it becomes even more important to understand what you're watching on a moment-by-moment basis. Because facial expressions are automatic, it actually reveals a lot about what your non-conscious behavior is. And facial expressions and facial coding is also being used today by the medical community. And, both UC San Diego, they are experimenting with facial coding software to read kids' expression to measure the pain levels, especially when they bring, kids in a clinical setting. It's very difficult for kids to articulate pain, and therefore they're looking at measuring this, especially for kids, and even in emergency rooms. And what it tells you is, the technology of facial coding, it's actually been initially started to help people either with autism or to help the medical world. And when a technology is being explored for the medical community, it's a very powerful technology. It's a very accurate technology which can also be applied in day-to-day learning to measure your ads response. Now, how do you measure facial coding? It's a fairly simple process. It's not complicated. As long as you have a webcam for video recording, it records your facial expressions, and it goes into an algorithm, and it actually spits out the kind of expressions. So as the viewers they're watching any particular stimulus, in this case an ad, the facial expressions are being captured. Some of the expressions are surprise, disgust, smile, frown, and there are a lot more emotions which can get captured. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just giving an example of these 4 emotions. Now, how do you integrate System 1 and System 2? And there's been this whole debate about should I do System 1 and how do you actually integrate these 2 systems together? The work which we've done actually is something which, and I think this talks about how when you combine the 2 systems, it actually gives you a much more positive correlation to sales. So you see the survey measures which says link and facial coding, and when each of them are predicting the relationship to sales effectiveness of the ad. When you combine both of them, it actually improves the sales effectiveness significantly. And this was just being done for emotional ads, and we actually ran the same thing for, sorry, I may have jumped a slide. So the first one was done for enjoyment-driven category, and we saw that the absence of frowns and increasing smiles were a very good indicator of predicting even better sales. So that was a study which was done in Germany, and there was another one which was done in the US on packaged goods category. And wherever, regardless of, I've seen this across several categories and several industries, where the more you combine both approaches, and the reason you need to combine them again is because you have to figure out a way to measure both systems of the brain. I mean, it is not enough to measure just one of the systems, and which traditionally for the last 60 or 70 years we've just been measuring system 2. So the more we see, if you were able to measure both the systems, it actually improves your predictiveness of sale. What we've also seen is that there's also an underlying relationship between expressiveness from facial coding. So expressiveness is all the emotions which you see in an ad, whether it's smile, surprise, frown, or disgust. If you see all of them together, we've also seen that the top 25% of the ads are actually driving most of the sales. So the more expressive the ad is, the more it actually drives sales. And the relationship is even stronger for medium or established brands where emotional engagement has even a stronger influence on the advertising success. And, talking about emotional engagement and why emotions are important, there's a little bit, if you dive into literature a little bit and you dive into how emotions are processed, you will actually understand it even better at a molecular level and the way the neurons processing happens. Your emotional processing happens much faster than the rational processing. When we say that in neuroscience that when neurons fire, they wire. And when there is an emotional event which happens, the wiring is even much, much stronger, and therefore you will actually remember emotional events. The second reason is that, in terms of biology, there are more connections or dendrites going from the amygdala, which is the emotional part of the brain, into your rational part of the brain. Then there are dendrites going from the rational to the emotional part of the brain. And there's this old famous study which was done by John Damasio, where they basically you had studied patients who had who had illness, and the only way to cure, a long time ago, was the mental disorder was to be able to disconnect the emotional and the rational part of the brain. And when they did that, what they found was that the people could actually distinguish between, if they were given two items, A and B, they could very clearly articulate why one was better than the other, but they could not, when they were asked to select one particular article or even food to eat, they just could not make a choice. So emotions are actually very, very important, and they sort of guide your behavior. Now, I'm actually going to show you a case study which was done for Audi. It actually shows you how you can use both facial coding as well as survey, so literally both system 1 and system 2, to create an effective cut down of an ad. And hopefully this example will be able to actually show you how you can actually leverage it. So I'll actually show the ad, and let me.
I've been out there most of my life. You name it, I've hooked it. But there's one that's always eluded me. Thought I had it in the blizzard of '93. Never even came close. It's got those eyes, those unmistakable eyes. They haunt my dreams. Folks around here think I'm crazy. But when you've seen the things I've seen, it can change you, man. Sometimes I actually think it's mocking me. What? What's wrong?
Well, I hope you could all watch the ad. And one of the things, challenges which you have when it's a slightly long ad is how do you cut it down? And the example which I have is basically going to show you how you can actually take this ad and cut it down. So this was done. I'll kind of jump onto this, but 150 consumers, online survey, to get to very quickly to the results. Just bear with me, the slide is taking a little bit longer to move. So there is we typically have a framework. You try and understand, does the ad connect at an emotional level? Did the ad affect the brand associations in the right way? And did the ad make the brand more desirable? So now let's kind of jump onto the results to see what happened. So when you look at enjoyment, the overall ad was polarizing. There were a bunch of people who liked it, but there were others who did not like it, and therefore it becomes a bit challenging to understand, how is it that you can actually cut this ad down. Now, when we saw the ad, and this is what we call, we're looking at now the smile trace. So you see this green line, the bold green line is actually the smile trace, which we will see people smiling and the smiles going up at the end. And then the dotted green line is actually the second view. So when people watched it again, they kind of got the story. And initially, they didn't know what this guy was actually doing and saying. But the second time around, we actually see people starting to relate to it. But then you start to see places where you see the smiles kind of dropping and the engagement, emotional engagement is kind of dropping in between. So we wanted to, dive into this a little bit more and see what exactly is happening. So we looked at all those people who were actually enjoying the ad, and we looked at the first 15 seconds, and we actually found out that the first 15 seconds were pretty flat, not engaging for everyone because people didn't kind of get the story. So, just to sort of get what was happening as I've overlaid the voiceover, and it's only when he actually starts to narrate the story, people start to get engaged and they start to like it. And the people who were not engaged pretty much disconnected and did not like it. So we basically said, look, let's try and see what's happening in the second view. So in the second view, you see people actually picking up in smiles in the second view, and we could very clearly identify the places where the engagement was actually increasing, and it was fairly easy to identify the more engaging moments of the ad and what is it that should and should not be included. So what we also did is we looked at what people had to say, and people were basically talking about the whole thing being a great story and one which they were engaged with. Some people found it unique and valuable about the Audi information. And the people who didn't like it, didn't like the guy, they found him annoying, and they thought the storyline was over the top. Now, we also wanted to basically look at, there are several things which we have looked at, but I'm only going to, for the sake of time, I'm only going to show you a much shorter version. But we looked at branding, and the branding was very weak, and consumers say that the brand was not very involved in the story. So we actually looked at the ad, and we could only find what the blue line and the red line just shows is people who said that they remembered the brand. They could remember the brand from those unmistakable eyes. And when the Quattro came and then the full car was visible. And we also dived into the survey measures to understand who are the people who were actually looking at the eyes and got it. And they were people who were very familiar with this brand, and they could identify the Audi literally by looking at the eyes because they were very unique. Those people who were not aware of the brand could not identify the brand very easily. But it became sort of important for us to know that you need to have those kind of scenes in there to make sure that the brand cues are there. We also dived into what people were saying, and a lot of people basically said you didn't show too much of the actual vehicle. And the full name of the car was shown only for a fraction of the time, very true. And without the appearance of the car, the brand name being in the ad would have been for any commercial. So it was very clear that there was not enough balance between the branding moments of the car as well as the overall storyline. And that kind of gave us fairly good direction. There were several other things which we checked. but for the sake of time, I've just shown you a way of integrating both System 1 and System 2 together. And then finally, we actually came up with this 30-second. We gave the recommendations, and the agency came up with this cut down. So I'll just play the cut down for you.
I've been out there most of my life. You name it, I've hooked it. But there's one that's always eluded me. Thought I had it in the blizzard of '93. Never even came close. Sometimes I actually think it's mocking me. What? What's wrong?
So you'll see what has happened over here in the ad is you've got a much higher weightage to the brand, and we jumped to the story, the blizzard of '93, very quickly because the initial parts were not as engaging. But you kept the story, and you saw that the brand was far more visible as compared to the longer version of the ad. What happened, this was actually, it contributed to Audi's best sales, and they had a sales which was 18.5% above the record set. So it actually worked out for them. And what the cut down, the ability to use both these systems and the ability to be able to cut down an ad has actually helped you to save not only media budgets, because the ad spots are very expensive, but also, more than that, it actually helped you create a much more effective ad than what was there. And again, it's a very nice way in which you can use both System 1 and System 2. So, I mean, in the end, is what I basically what I found over the working for so many years is combining both direct and indirect measures, again, to successfully capture System 1, System 2 is pretty crucial. And it actually adds a very, very different dimension. I've done this in several areas, and I've just been able to show you two examples given the kind of time which we had. But 10, 15, or I would say 17 years ago, with the advent of online research had started, not too many people were using online research. Today, the market has, the industry has evolved. When there are measures of, there are ways to measure how your non-conscious behavior directly using so many tools. Using them and integrating them with survey measures is actually giving you a much valuable insight. So that's the end of my session, and I'll give it over to Earl if there are questions.
Yes, thanks very much, Deepak. That's great. We have had some questions come in. Let me start with one that asks you to talk a little bit about something you mentioned at the outset but didn't focus as much on, and that's using EEG as one of the indications of brain function and how that's incorporated. You talked a lot about facial coding and some of the other things, but a little bit more about EEG and maybe when that's particularly appropriate for getting at those implicit processes that you talked about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, EEG is, I would say, is also very sensitive, and it is equally appropriate. Though the parts which you have to sort of start to, get a bit careful about EEG is the fact that it's done in a laboratory setting. Therefore, it limits the extent to which the solution can be scalable, and it is partly restricted to a bit to where you may have labs or where the equipment can actually go. So EEG can be used, but EEG is also pretty good when you're doing any product testing, for example, to when you're consuming a product, and if you are going through a whole product testing protocol, it actually tells you in a very nice way which parts of the brain start to fire when you're tasting the product versus anticipation of the product, and you can actually use EEG to find those specific moments. I've also seen EEG used for print advertising. I think it's also a very nice way in which EEG and eye tracking can be complemented together and used to look at a print ad. I think along with the rest of it, the parts which one has to be only careful about is that if you are having several, I would say, target groups to study, it can start to become expensive, and scalability is the only other part which is in question.
There's a related question that Mary had, which again may be similar concerns about the use, but using of FMRI. So maybe a little bit about when that might be appropriate, given that it is going to be constrained by some of the same situations you just described for EEG.
Yeah, fMRI, the biggest issue with fMRI is the fact that, the technology is such that if you move even a little bit, first of all, you have to lie down in that fMRI chamber, and if you even move a little bit, there are artifacts. So fMRI is actually not commonly used. It may be used in academia to do studies, but in the market research industry, it's not used as much. Even with EEG, there are a lot of issues of artifacts, and therefore you have to clean, the signals, and the signal to noise to signal ratio has to be a good one, and therefore sample sizes, you have to oversample it a little bit. And in case of EEG, people typically sample 28 to 30. In facial coding, the sample sizes are higher. Typically, they go up to 70s, which allow you to kind of dissect it in different ways.
Thank you. There were a couple of questions that came in. Your example of combining measures of system 1 and 2. You get the implicit associations and so forth from the techniques you described, but then you also get maybe the more conscious results that can be obtained by a survey. And you said that the combination of those two actually gave better results in terms of predicting sales. I think early on in the era of interest in neuroscience and applied to marketing, there was a sense that it was supplanting, or it was giving you the real story that the more superficial survey research didn't get. And yet you say that the combination of the two actually is more predictive. So could you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example, and this is when you're actually measuring, when you're combining both the measures, and when we're a simpler example would be when we're looking at an ad. So as we just looked at an ad, and we found that, for example, when you look at an ad and you ask somebody a question, did you like the ad or did you dislike that? And in the survey responses, you might actually see people saying, yes, I like that, and I like the whole idea about the story was unique, blah blah blah. But when you actually look at the facial coding responses, you actually find out that the ad was not as engaging as one would have thought, but maybe the people have liked the idea, but when they were watching it, they were tuning out right in the beginning of the story. So what it tells you is the survey responses kind of give you an overall rational measure when people had time to think about it and say, yes, I like that. But when you were looking at the ad on a moment-by-moment basis, you found that in several parts of the ad, it was not engaging. What it means is, if this ad were to have gone on air, the full 60 seconds, it probably would have, people may have tuned out. People might have just not even watched the full ad. By combining both the systems, actually told you that, yes, most of the people liked the story, but the execution was not strong enough, and therefore we needed to change and optimize the execution and change the execution. And that's how we actually combine both these measures together. In several other ways in which you can actually literally do a simple XY plot and plot what you get on the survey measures versus facial coding or implicit or any other implicit measurement which you're doing, whether it's EEG or any biometrics. And the combination of the two, which basically means what you actually feel and versus what you actually say, if they are in sync together, that's the right way to go. So that is what your leverageable strength is. But if they're not in sync together, you actually need to diagnose why.
That's interesting. So that was one of the questions that came up as well about how do you resolve discrepancies between the different measures. The one most often cited is between what people say or feel explicitly and what the brain scan or whatever method you're using indicates. But presumably some of these techniques themselves could conflict. Would you get a different read maybe from EEG than from skin conductance or something? Or do they tend to pretty much co-occur and you don't have to worry about resolving which signal to believe?
Yeah, so there's a slight difference. I mean, EEG is right up there in the source. You're kind of picking up brain signals. Then facial expressions happen literally about 100 to 250 milliseconds post that. So all the literature that I've read, and there was studies which has been done by Paul Ekman, where they more or less, when facial coding and EEG, when they've combined the results, because what EEG gives you is EEG will tell you an approach versus withdrawal phenomena, which people are emotionally engaged. All it means is somebody is approaching the stimulus, or somebody is disengaged means they're leaning away. So EEG does not actually tell you the type of emotion, and therefore, even in academia, we see EEG being combined with facial expressions to understand the type of emotions. To that extent, both EEG and facial coding, when you look at least all the work which I've done, the highs and lows are very, very much similar. The skin conductance also cannot define the type of emotion. The skin conductance, the only issue with GSR is the response is lagged. So, if I count like 1 to, like from a time a stimulus has happened, so if you hear a noise like bang, and I wait 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's the time it will take for the skin conductance to actually show up. So the only, I would say, drawback for skin conductance is it's a lagged measure. Therefore, EEG and facial coding are a little bit more, I would say, temporal.
Related, more of a technical question about the facial scanning. Just like with FMRI or EEG, you're saying there's certain constraints, in the laboratory, and if you move the slightest amount, it can throw things off. With facial coding, presumably the quality of the camera, the resolution, the lighting, those kind of conditions would affect things. Are those techniques now pretty robust in different settings, or is there still some concerns about having to have the lighting just right or straight-on facial view or something of that type?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, yes, those are concerns, and therefore, what typically, in any of these methods, you have to oversample and you have to, count for some attrition which is going to happen, whether it's in EEG or in facial coding. You have to basically make sure that the quality of the video. So you will probably get maybe 10% of the sample which will get eliminated because the lightings were not appropriate or the facial expressions could not be read.
Well, that's interesting because that's in many ways not that different than traditional research techniques that have outliers in the data. A related question came up just now, and that is, can you get sufficient reads on facial expressions, especially the micro expressions, say via a typical laptop camera, PC? If you're doing an online interview with someone, would the technology today allow you to do that sort of facial coding over a typical PC connection?
So the PCs, yes, though not in a mobile phone, or if you were trying to get it on an iPad, for example, no, then not, because that resolution. But for PCs, yes, so you should be able to pick up the micro expressions going into, and typically the micro expressions which actually evolve into a very, very strong conscious expressions are picked up far more easily. If the micro expression is like a fleeting expression in between a fairly long stimulus, no, then we won't pick it up.
That makes sense. So conscious of the time, we want to give you a chance to maybe wrap up with one sort of broader question, and that is something you and I talked about before we started this afternoon, and that is kind of how this has evolved over time. I think we would both agree there were some extreme claims maybe made for what neuroscience and neuro imaging and so forth could do early on as marketers began to look at that. What would you say today is still probably the most misunderstood or hyped claim being made, kind of a cautionary note for those who are interested but maybe a little skeptical or concerned that they don't overgeneralize? So this would be by way of advice, I guess, parting advice to people about how to know when best to apply these techniques and maybe what to be a little bit careful about.
I basically always say, don't ever stop talking to your consumers. Yes, always talk. And therefore, integration, I would still think is the future, because what it tells you is the system 1 and system 2 response. The more you understand non-conscious behavior, and like, this Trump versus Clinton example, if their parties had done it, they probably would have gone about it in a very different way. And therefore, it's giving an added layer of information which we did not have earlier. We've used, indirect techniques like conjoint, laddering, several ways to come at it. But now there are these techniques which are available for you to measure the emotional response. And so I would basically say, when you use them, don't stop talking to your consumers. And there should be a very nice way that you will be able to actually integrate both the responses together to come up with an informed decision.
Okay, that's great. That's a great positive and I think a wise note to end on. So thank you so much, Deepak. If we didn't get to your questions, or if there are additional things you'd like to discuss, we invite you to reach out to Deepak at deepak.varma@cantarmillwardbrown.com. Our next webinar will be Social Media Management from a Cultural Perspective, featuring Ashley Humphreys of Northwestern University. That's on May 10th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And as always, many thanks to the members of the MSI audience for participating in our member-to-member webinar series.